I saw it in her eyes. The realization that the control she had clung to for so long was slipping away. That her weapons no longer worked on me. Still, she tried to regain her footing. "You're ungrateful," she hissed, her voice trembling. After everything I've done, I cut her off with silence. Not shouting. Not arguing. Just silence. I kept my eyes steady, my face unreadable. It rattled her more than any insult could have. She pointed the scissors toward me, but the gesture was weak, almost pitiful. "James will hear about this," she threatened. "He'll know what kind of woman you really are." And again, I smiled. "Good," I said. "Tell him." The simplicity of it broke her. For years, she had thrived on twisting narratives, on being the one who controlled the story. She relied on people's fear of exposure. But when I invited it, when I showed her I wasn't afraid, it left her with nothing. Her face reddened. Her lips quivered. The scissors clattered as she set them down, suddenly powerless in her hand. I bent down, picked up a piece of torn lace, and held it gently between my fingers. "You thought this would ruin me," I whispered. "But all you've done is prove who you are." The silence after that was thick. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She stood there, hollowed out, like a statue of someone who had lost a war they didn't know they were fighting. I walked past her then, my footsteps slow, steady. I didn't run. I didn't rush. I left her standing in that room with the remains of her victory crumbling at her feet. When I closed the door behind me, I felt lighter. Not because my dress was gone. It was. Not because the wedding was saved. It wasn't. Not yet. I felt lighter because, for the first time, I wasn't carrying her weight anymore. I had refused to give her what she wanted. That night, James noticed something different in me. He asked if everything was all right, and I looked at him. Really looked at him. The man I was marrying. The man who mattered. And I said, "Tomorrow, no matter what happens, we're walking forward." I didn't tell him everything right then. Part of me wanted to wait, to choose my moment. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. The next morning, as the house buzzed with preparations, she avoided my eyes. She moved stiffly, spoke curtly. She didn't tell James what she'd done, not yet. I think a part of her was still calculating, still hoping she could twist the narrative, but she didn't realize something crucial. The game had already changed because she no longer frightened me, and when you take away fear from someone who thrives on it, they crumble. That was the turning point, not the scissors, not the shredded dress, but the moment I refused to play her game. And I knew, as I stood at the edge of my wedding day, that the fallout was coming. The smear campaign, the whispers, the desperate attempt to rewrite the story. But I was ready. Because once you've stared cruelty in the face and smiled, there's nothing left it can do to you. The morning of the wedding arrived, and with it came a silence thicker than the veil of any bride. My mother-in-law moved through the house like a shadow, her steps clipped, her face a careful mask. She didn't speak of the dress. She didn't mention the scissors. She acted as though nothing had happened. But silence, when it carries a secret, is louder than any scream. I felt it at breakfast. The way her eyes darted toward me and then away. The way she laughed too loudly at trivial comments, as if trying to stitch a sense of normalcy over a wound that was still bleeding. James noticed it too, though he didn't yet understand what lay beneath. My bridesmaids gathered around me, their voices a comforting hum as they prepared me for the day. They had heard whispers of something wrong with the dress, but they didn't press. One of them slipped her hand into mine and whispered, "Whatever it is, you look calm." "Too calm," I smiled, because calm was the only weapon I had left, and it was sharper than any pair of scissors. The wedding went on, though not in the dress I had chosen. I wore a backup gown, simpler, less dramatic, but still mine. And when I walked down the aisle, James's eyes filled with the same light they would have if I had been draped in lace and silk. He saw me, not the dress. Me. For a moment, I forgot her entirely. The vows, the promises, the quiet trembling of our hands as we exchanged rings, those were untouchable. She could not cut them apart, but she wasn't done. In the days that followed, her silence gave way to whispers. First within the family, she told cousins that I had ruined my own dress in a fit of nerves. She told her sister that I had thrown a tantrum the night before the wedding. She claimed she had tried to help, but that I had turned the story against her. It spread like smoke, curling into corners, suffocating the truth. At first, I let it go. I had lived with lies before. I knew how to outlast them. But then I heard her words repeated back to me at a family gathering. An aunt leaned in and said, "I'm so sorry you had a breakdown before the wedding." Must have been so hard, my chest tightened. Not from shame. From fury. That was the moment I knew silence was no longer enough. So I exposed her. Not with shouting. Not with rage. But with evidence. I had taken photographs the night before. The shredded lace. The scissors still lying on the floor. The sunlight casting sharp shadows across the wreckage. Proof. Cold. Undeniable proof. At the next family dinner, when her version of the story began to leak through her carefully chosen words, I reached into my bag and laid the photographs on the table. The room went still. Her hand froze halfway to her glass. Her eyes flicked to the images, and in that instant, everyone saw it. The truth, there was no tantrum. No breakdown. No nervous bride destroying her own gown. There was only her, standing in the wreckage of something she had tried to erase. She tried to speak, but her voice faltered. Those are staged, she insisted. But her words fell flat. Too desperate. Too late. Around the table, eyes shifted. Doubt seeped in where loyalty once lived. Whispers turned against her. Questions she couldn't answer piled up. Her own sister muttered, "What have you done?" And just like that, the empire of control she had built for decades began to crumble. It didn't happen all at once. People like her never fall in a single blow. They claw, they scramble, they try to rebuild their lies. But the seed of truth had been planted, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't uproot it. James saw the photographs too. His face went pale, then flushed with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. He looked at his mother, not with the fear of a son trying to appease her, but with the clarity of a man seeing her for who she truly was. He stood. "This ends here," he said simply. And that was that. The smear campaign lost its force. The whispers faded. The family began to see me differently. Not as the villain she had tried to paint me, but as the one who had endured, who had stayed calm in the face of cruelty. As for her, she retreated. Not completely. Women like her never vanish, but her power was broken. The invitations to meddle grew fewer. Her comments lost their sting. She no longer looked at me as prey, but as someone she could not defeat. And me? I learned something vital. I learned that destruction is never about the object. It's about control. People cut, break, and shatter the things they can't possess. My wedding dress was never just fabric. It was a symbol of independence, of love she couldn't control. By cutting it, she thought she could cut me down too, but she was wrong, because what survived wasn't the gown, it was me. The vows, the love, the truth. I often think back to that single sentence I gave her in the quiet of that ruined room. "It's not the dress I'm marrying in, it's the man." Those words weren't just a shield. They were a declaration, a reminder that the power she thought she held was an illusion. That nothing she cut apart could touch what was already unbreakable. And now, as I look back on it all, I find myself grateful in a strange way. Not for her cruelty, not for the pain, but for the clarity it brought me. For showing me that calm is not weakness, that silence is not surrender, that sometimes the sharpest response is the one that doesn't raise its voice. The wedding pictures hang in our home today. Not the dress I once dreamed of, but the life I always hoped for. James and I still laugh about it sometimes, though there's a shadow behind the laughter. A shadow of the woman who thought she could cut her way into control. And yet when I see those photographs, I don't see her. I don't see the scissors. I don't even see the torn fabric. I see us, whole, untouched, unbroken. So I'll leave you with this. If you walked into a room and found someone destroying the symbol of your joy, your wedding dress, your celebration, your happiness, what would you do? Would you scream? Would you fight? Would you break? Or would you smile and say one sentence that changes everything? I still remember the sound more than anything else. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't even words. It was the steady, almost rhythmic snip, snip, snip of metal cutting through delicate fabric. When I walked into that room, I froze. The scent of pressed lace and faint perfume still lingered in the air, but it was being overpowered by the sound of destruction. My eyes adjusted to what I was seeing, and for a moment my brain refused to process it. There she was, my mother-in-law. Her back was turned, her shoulders hunched forward with concentration. She held a pair of large silver scissors in her hand, the blades glinting as the light from the window caught them. Each motion was deliberate, controlled. She wasn't frantic. She wasn't panicking. She was calm, almost methodical, as she dragged those blades through the soft white fabric of my wedding dress, the dress I had saved for. The dress I had dreamed about. The dress I was supposed to wear the very next day, and there it was, falling apart before my eyes. I couldn't move at first. My legs felt heavy, my arms limp at my sides. My heart was pounding so hard that I could hear it in my ears. But my face betrayed nothing. She hadn't noticed me yet. She was still bent over the gown, her lips pressed together in satisfaction. When she finally turned and her eyes met mine, she didn't flinch. She didn't look guilty. If anything, she looked victorious. A long silence stretched between us. The air felt thick, like it was pressing down on my lungs. I thought I would collapse under the weight of it. My throat burned with words that wanted to come out. Anger, heartbreak, the sheer unfairness of it all. I imagined myself screaming, throwing the scissors out of her hands, falling to the floor in tears. That's what she wanted. I could see it in her eyes, the anticipation of my breakdown. She was waiting for me to fall apart so she could step into the role of the calm, reasonable one. The savior in the story she had already prepared to tell everyone else, but I didn't give her that. Instead, I smiled. My lips curled upward slowly, controlled. Not a joyful smile, not a nervous one, but something else entirely. The kind of smile that comes when you realize you hold a secret the other person doesn't know yet. Her eyebrows twitched, just slightly. A flicker of confusion broke through her confidence. That's when I spoke. Just one sentence. I won't tell you what it was yet. Not now. Because to understand why that single sentence mattered, why it landed the way it did, you need to know everything that had led to this moment. Because the truth is, this wasn't about a dress. It was about years of control, of bitterness, of resentment carefully wrapped in polite smiles at family dinners. It was about the way my fiancé's family had been shaped long before I ever entered it. Standing there, watching the shredded pieces of lace and silk slip to the floor, I realized I wasn't just staring at a ruined gown. I was staring at the final act in a long play that had been rehearsed for decades. I wanted to tell her that. I wanted to lay out everything I had seen, every little cruelty she thought went unnoticed. But instead, I kept my body still, my breathing measured, my eyes steady. She shifted her weight, suddenly less certain of herself. The scissors drooped slightly in her hand. I remember the way the sunlight hit her face in that moment, showing the lines of age, the sharpness of her expression, the hardness she had carried for so long. I remember how quiet the room was, aside from the faint sound of the fabric that had already been cut drifting to the floor. It was a silence that demanded to be filled, but I didn't fill it with rage. I filled it with something else. calm. I think that's what unnerved her the most. She had prepared for every other version of me. The one who would cry. The one who would beg. The one who would collapse into my fiancé's arms afterward saying, "Your mother ruined everything." She had even prepared for the one who would scream at her, who would shove her, who would become the villain in her carefully constructed narrative. But she wasn't ready for the version of me who smiled. And as I opened my mouth, as my voice broke through that suffocating silence, I gave her the one thing she couldn't twist, couldn't rewrite, couldn't take away. A single sentence. A sentence that didn't just answer her act of destruction, but ended the game she had been playing for years. But before I tell you what I said, before I show you how everything unraveled from there, you need to understand the history that brought us here. Because this wasn't the first time she tried to break something beautiful. This was just the first time I refused to let her win. To understand why my mother-in-law stood there, scissors in hand, slicing through the fabric of my wedding dress, you have to understand the kind of world that raised her and the kind of world that raised me. Because people don't just wake up one day and decide to destroy something sacred. That kind of cruelty, it's inherited. It's learned. It's a performance rehearsed across generations. I grew up in a family where silence was often louder than words. My parents weren't cruel in the traditional sense, but they played favorites. My older brother Daniel was the golden child. Everything he did was praised, polished, and celebrated. Every trophy he won was displayed, every mistake quickly forgiven. Me? I was the quiet one. The one expected to keep the peace, to step aside so others could shine. It's strange, isn't it? How roles are assigned to us before we even understand what they mean. My role was to be invisible until needed. My role was to swallow hurt, to smile when I didn't want to make room for everyone else's storm without ever showing my own. That kind of upbringing shapes you. It trains your face to stay calm while your chest burns. It teaches you to breathe through moments when you want to scream. It teaches you that silence, when used the right way, can be a weapon more powerful than words. I didn't know it then, but those lessons would become the very thing that saved me years later. When I met James, my fiancé, I thought I had finally found a home where love could be soft, where family didn't feel like a battlefield. He was gentle, thoughtful, always watching the way I carried myself as if he knew I'd spent years holding too much inside. He treated me like someone worth listening to, worth cherishing. But with James came his family. And with his family came a mother who didn't just want control. She needed it. The first time I met her, I noticed the way she sized me up. Not with curiosity, not even with mild politeness, but with calculation. Her eyes flicked over my clothes, my hands the way I spoke, as if she were studying me for weaknesses. Her words that day were sugar-coated. She smiled too wide, hugged too tightly. She called me dear in a tone that felt rehearsed. And yet underneath there was something sharp. I could feel it. James's father was quiet, almost ghost-like. He sat at the table nodding along, never contradicting his wife. He had learned long ago, I think, that it was easier to agree than to challenge. His silence was his survival. The siblings weren't much better off. James's younger sister, Emily, was timid, her voice barely rising above a whisper. His older brother, Michael, carried himself like a man who lived permanently in his mother's shadow, competing for her approval even though it was impossible to win. And then there was James. My James. The one who, despite all of this, had carved out a piece of himself that was gentle, different, resistant. But even he wasn't untouched by her influence. I saw the way he flinched when she raised her voice, the way he tried to keep the peace during family dinners, the way he rushed to smooth over conflicts before they escalated. It was familiar. Too familiar. I realized then, I wasn't just marrying James, I was marrying into a hierarchy. A family where one woman's dominance shaped everyone's behavior. A household where control was the unspoken currency. At first, I tried to fit in. I told myself it was temporary. That once James and I built our own life, her influence would fade into the background. But control doesn't loosen its grip so easily. The cracks began to show early. She commented on everything, my hair, my job, even the way I set the table. At dinners, she would drop little barbs disguised as jokes. "Oh, you're not much of a cook, are you?" Or, "James always liked his coffee this way, but maybe you'll learn." Each remark was small enough to dismiss if I wanted to. But strung together, they formed a pattern. She wasn't just testing me, she was reminding me. Reminding me that in her world, there was only one queen. I could have snapped back. I could have defended myself. But every instinct from my childhood told me not to. Instead, I stayed calm. I smiled when she expected a frown. I let silence stretch when she expected me to justify myself. That unsettled her. I could tell, still I tried to believe it wouldn't go further. That she wouldn't cross a line. That maybe if I just stayed patient, she would soften. But deep down I knew better, because women like her don't soften. They escalate. Looking back, I see the signs more clearly. The possessiveness when James and I announced our engagement. The way she inserted herself into every detail of the wedding planning. The way she treated the event less like a celebration of love and more like a stage she needed to control. When she offered to help with the dress, a part of me hesitated. But I ignored the feeling. I wanted to believe she could be trusted with something so sacred. And yet, as I stood in that room the night before my wedding, staring at the shredded remains of the gown I had chosen with so much care, I realized the truth I had been avoiding. This wasn't about fabric. It wasn't even about me. It was about her need to prove that she could still control her son's life. That no matter how far he tried to step away, she could still reach in and destroy the things he cherished most. My wedding dress was just the vessel. I remember standing in that room, replaying all of it in my head. My childhood, my family's favoritism, the silence I had learned to wield. And I realized this wasn't new to me. I had been preparing for this moment my whole life. The only difference was, this time, I wasn't the child expected to stay invisible. This time, I had power, and I knew exactly how to use it. Weddings are supposed to be about joy, about two families coming together, about the start of something new. But in my case, every step toward the altar felt like stepping deeper into a battlefield I hadn't chosen. The battles didn't start with scissors. They started small. I remember the first disagreement clearly. It was over flowers. James and I had chosen simple arrangements, white roses mixed with lavender, a combination that felt calm and elegant. My mother-in-law wrinkled her nose the moment she saw the plan. "White and lavender?" she said, her tone sharp with disapproval. "Funeral colors, not wedding colors. You'll depress the guests before they even sit down." She laughed after she said it as if it were a harmless joke. But her eyes were serious. James tried to smooth it over. "Mom, it's what we like," he said gently. But she wasn't listening. The next day, she sent us catalogs of bright, gaudy arrangements, circling the ones she preferred. "Something cheerful," she insisted. "Something guests will remember." It was the first time I realized that our choices weren't just being questioned, they were being replaced. After that, it was the guest list. She complained that it was too small, too exclusive. She added names without asking, distant cousins and old friends James barely remembered. "They'll be offended if they aren't invited," she warned. "Do you want to start your marriage with resentment?" I bit my tongue. I let her words roll off me, but inside I felt something simmering. The dress, though, that was the crown jewel of her criticism. I had found it after weeks of searching. A lace bodice, delicate but strong, with a flowing skirt that moved like water. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't extravagant. But it felt like me. The first time she saw it, she pursed her lips. "Pretty," she said flatly. "Though a bit plain, don't you think? I always pictured James's bride in something grander." I smiled politely, but I held my ground. "This is the one I love," I told her. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Over the next few weeks, her comments grew sharper. "You'll regret not choosing something more elegant," she murmured once, as if speaking to herself but loud enough for me to hear. Another time, at dinner, she told James, "Your bride deserves something fit for a queen. Don't you think?" James defended me, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He was caught between the woman who raised him and the woman he loved. And I knew. That was exactly where she wanted him. Still, I tried to keep the peace. I had learned long ago that people like her thrive on chaos, and denying them that chaos is sometimes the only power you have. But there was a shift, subtle at first. She began offering help. She volunteered to handle tasks I hadn't asked her to. "It'll take some stress off you," she'd say sweetly. She wanted to know where the dress was being stored, who was doing the cake, what time the seamstress appointments were. James thought she was just being involved. I knew better. One evening, she called me and asked if she could keep the dress safe at her house until the wedding. She said she worried about accidents, spilled drinks, fire, theft. Her voice was syrupy, dripping with false concern. Everything in me screamed no. My chest tightened, my palms went cold. But I had been conditioned, both by my childhood and by her constant pressure, to avoid direct confrontation. So instead of refusing outright, I delayed. I told her the dress was already safe, already cared for. She didn't push further that night. But her tone told me this wasn't the end. In the days leading up to the wedding, she grew restless. She criticized the venue as too small, the food as too simple, the music as too modern. And though James stood by me, I could feel the cracks forming. The arguments in whispers, the stress he tried to hide from me. And then came the day before the wedding. I remember the air was heavy with anticipation. The house buzzed with preparations. My bridesmaids were running errands, my family was arriving, and I had slipped away for just a moment of quiet. That's when I heard it, the sound that would haunt me forever. Snip, snip, snip. At first, I thought it was just paper. Someone wrapping a gift, trimming a ribbon. But the sound was too sharp, too deliberate. It drew me toward the guest room where the dress was hanging, waiting for its moment. And there she was, her back turned, scissors in hand, slicing through the fabric with surgical precision. The lace I had touched so carefully, the silk I had smoothed over with my own hands, it was being destroyed before my eyes. Time slowed. My breath caught in my throat. The room spun, but my body stayed rooted to the floor. I should have shouted. I should have rushed forward. But something inside me, something deeper than fear, deeper than anger, kept me still. Because in that moment, as horrifying as it was, I understood. This wasn't a sudden act of madness. It was the final step in a plan she had been building all along. Every criticism, every backhanded comment, every false smile had led to this. She didn't want me to walk down that aisle in confidence. She didn't want her son to see me radiant, untouchable, beyond her control. She wanted to shatter me. And yet, as the pieces of lace fell to the floor, I realized something she didn't. She hadn't destroyed me. She had revealed herself. This wasn't just about a dress. It was about a woman who couldn't bear to lose her grip on the people around her. A woman so desperate for control that she was willing to humiliate herself to take it. And that realization changed everything, because when she finally turned, when her eyes met mine, expecting me to break, she didn't see fear, she saw calm, she saw silence, she saw power, and she didn't know it yet. But the game she thought she was winning had already slipped out of her hands. The room was frozen. The lace hung in tatters, drifting toward the carpet like white ash. The scissors gleamed in her hand, her knuckles pale from gripping too tightly. She had expected an explosion. She had been waiting for it. I could see it in the tightness of her shoulders, the smirk tugging at the corner of her lips, the way her body leaned forward just slightly, as if bracing for impact. She wanted me to scream, to sob, to collapse at her feet so she could play the role of comforter, rescuer, martyr. But instead, I smiled. It wasn't a wide smile. It wasn't cruel. It was calm, controlled. It was the kind of smile that unsettles because it doesn't belong in the script. And in that moment, I saw her confidence falter. Her eyes narrowed. "What are you smiling at?" she asked, her voice low, careful. I let the silence stretch. Silence is powerful when someone expects sound. I held her gaze, my breath steady, my hands clasped lightly in front of me. The ruined dress lay between us, the battlefield of our unspoken war. Finally, I spoke. Just one sentence. "It's not the dress I'm marrying in. It's the man." The words landed heavy in the air. They weren't loud, but they were final. Her face shifted instantly, as though I had slapped her. The triumph drained from her eyes, replaced with something else, something raw, confusion, fear, maybe even shame. Because she realized in that instant that her act of destruction had failed. She hadn't broken me. She hadn't broken the wedding. She had only revealed her own bitterness. I stepped closer, slow and deliberate, forcing her to step back. The scissors slipped slightly in her hand as if they'd suddenly grown heavy. "Do you understand?" I said softly. "This dress was never my foundation. It was never the point. You can cut lace, you can shred silk, but you can't touch what really matters." Her mouth opened as if to reply, but no words came. That was the turning point.